The rain had not stopped for 3 days straight in Ashford, Virginia. It came down in sheets that turned the gutters into rivers and made the old oak trees along Beaumont Street groan under the weight of the water. And inside a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like mildew and broken promises, a woman named Clara Whitfield sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, staring at a stack of bills she could not pay. There were 7 envelopes in all. The electric company, the water company, a past due notice from the pediatrician's office, a collection agency letter about a credit card she had maxed out buying groceries 6 months ago, and at the very bottom, the one that made her stomach turn every time she looked at it, a bright yellow envelope from the Ashford County Housing Authority, informing her that she had exactly 30 days to vacate the apartment or face formal eviction proceedings. 30 days. That was all the time she had left to figure out how to keep a roof over the heads of her 2 children. Her daughter, Lily, was 7. Her son, Marcus, was 4. They were asleep in the bedroom they shared, curled up together on a mattress that sat on the floor because the bed frame had broken 2 months ago and Clara could not afford to replace it. She could hear Marcus coughing through the thin wall, the same dry cough that the doctor said needed a nebulizer treatment she could not pay for. And Lily had come home from school that afternoon with a note from her teacher saying she needed new shoes because the soles of her current pair were separating from the uppers, and the other children had started to notice. Clara picked up the eviction notice and read it again, even though she had already memorized every word. The language was cold and clinical. It talked about lease violations and unpaid balances and legal remedies. It did not talk about what it felt like to tell your children that you might have to move again. It did not talk about the look in a 7-year-old's eyes when she realizes that her mother is scared. It did not talk about any of that, because the law does not care about those things. The law only cares about numbers, and Clara's numbers were very, very bad. She had been working 2 jobs for the past 1.5 years. During the day, she cleaned rooms at the Ashford Motor Lodge, so a roadside motel on Route 15 that catered to truckers and traveling salesmen and people who needed a place to sleep that did not ask too many questions. At night, 3 times a week, she waitressed at Benny's Diner on the south side of town, serving coffee and meatloaf to the late-night crowd until her feet ached so badly she could barely walk to her car. Between the 2 jobs, she brought home about $2,200 a month. The rent alone was $1,100. But after utilities and food and the minimum payments on her debts, she was left with less than nothing. She was falling behind by about $200 every single month, and the hole was getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Her ex-husband, Derek, had left when Marcus was 6 months old. He had packed a bag one Tuesday morning while Clara was at work and driven away in the only car they owned, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter that said simply, I can't do this anymore. He had not paid a single dollar of child support since then. Clara had tried to track him down through the courts, but Derek had a talent for disappearing. Last she heard, he was somewhere in Florida, working construction jobs under a different name. The courts could not garnish wages they could not find. So Clara was alone, completely, utterly alone. Her parents had passed away years ago. Her older sister, Denise, had lived in Richmond and had made it clear that she had her own problems and could not help. The few friends Clara had from high school had drifted away over the years, the way friends do when your life becomes a story they do not want to be part of. She had no safety net, no backup plan, no one to call at 2 in the morning when the fear became so heavy that it felt like it would crush her. And now, she had 30 days. Clara folded the eviction notice carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. She had cried enough. Crying did not pay bills. Crying did not put food on the table. Crying did not fix anything. She needed to think. She needed a plan. She needed something, anything, that could change the trajectory of the life that was spiraling further and further out of her control. That something came the very next morning, in the most unlikely form imaginable. It was a Saturday, and Clara had the day off from both jobs, which was rare. She had taken Lily and Marcus to the public library because it was free and warm and had a children's section where they could play while she sat in one of the worn armchairs and tried to figure out her next move. She was scrolling through her phone, looking at apartment listings she could not afford, when she overheard a conversation between two men sitting at a nearby table. They were both older, now wearing the kind of flannel shirts and work boots that marked them as locals. One of them had a copy of the Ashford Gazette spread out in front of him, and he was pointing at something in the classified section. "You see this?" the man said, tapping the paper with his finger. "The Hargrove place is going up for auction next week. County seized it for back taxes." The other man snorted. "That old wreck on Pinecrest Road? Place has been falling apart for 20 years. Nobody in their right mind would touch it. Starting bid is $750. Could be 750 cents, and I still wouldn't want it. You'd spend a fortune just tearing it down. Foundation's probably shot. Roof caved in on the east wing back in '08. And you know what they say about old man Hargrove. Place gives me the creeps." Clara was not trying to eavesdrop, but the number had caught her attention. $750. For a house, even a ruined one, that was almost nothing. She leaned slightly closer, pretending to read her phone. "Who was Hargrove anyway?" the first man asked. "Elias Hargrove, old money family. His grandfather made a fortune in textiles back before the First World War. Built that mansion in 1906. Biggest house in the county at the time. 22 rooms, if you can believe it. But the family lost most of their money in the Depression, and Elias was the last one left. Lived there alone for decades, became a recluse, wouldn't let anyone on the property. When he died back in '97, they found him sitting in a chair in the front parlor. Had been dead for almost 2 weeks before anyone noticed. That's grim. Gets worse. The house has been tied up in legal disputes ever since. No clear heirs. County tried to sell it a few times, but every buyer backed out. Place is cursed, if you ask me." The men went back to their coffee and changed the subject, but Clara's mind was racing. $750. She had exactly $812 in her checking account, which was supposed to last her until the end of the month. If she spent $750 of it on a house, even a ruined one, she would have $62 left to feed herself and 2 children for 3 weeks. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of decision that a desperate person makes when they have run out of rational options. But Clara was desperate, and she was running out of options. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was whispering that a house, even a broken one, was still a house. It was still walls, and a roof, and a place to be. It was still better than the street. She pulled up the Ashford County website on her phone and searched for the tax auction listing. It was there, just as the men had described. Property at 14 Pinecrest Road. Former residence of Elias Hargrove. A minimum bid $750. Auction date next Thursday at 10 in the morning at the county courthouse. Property sold as is. No warranties, no guarantees. Buyer assumes all liability. Clara stared at the listing for a long time. Then she looked across the library at her children. Lily was reading a picture book to Marcus, holding it up so he could see the illustrations, her voice soft and patient. Marcus was leaning against his sister, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes wide with attention. They were so small. They were so trusting. They believed that their mother would figure it out because that is what mothers do. They figure it out. Clara closed her phone and made a decision that would change everything. The auction was held in the main courtroom of the Ashford County Courthouse, a grand old building with marble floors and high ceilings, that smelled like furniture polish and bureaucracy. Clara arrived 20 minutes early, wearing the nicest clothes she owned, which was a pair of black pants from Goodwill and a blouse that she had ironed 3 times that morning. She had arranged for Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived downstairs, to watch Lily and Marcus for a few hours. She had not told Mrs. Patterson what she was doing. She had not told anyone. There were about 15 people in the courtroom when the auction began. Most of them were men in suits, or real estate investors and developers who attended these auctions regularly, looking for bargains they could flip for profit. They glanced at Clara when she walked in, and then looked away, dismissing her immediately. She was clearly not one of them. She did not belong here. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man with a booming voice, worked through several properties before reaching the Hargrove estate. A small commercial lot on Elm Street went for $12,000. A vacant lot on the edge of town went for $3,000. A condemned gas station went for $8,000. The investors bid confidently, raising their paddles with practiced ease, their faces revealing nothing. Then the auctioneer reached lot number 7. Next up, we have the property at 14 Pinecrest Road. Former Hargrove residence. 22-room mansion on approximately 4 acres. Structure is in significant disrepair. County assessment notes include roof damage, water damage, and foundation concerns, and possible structural compromise in the east wing. Property is sold strictly as is. Starting bid is $750. Do I have $750? There was silence. The investors looked at each other and shook their heads. One of them laughed quietly. Another one whispered something to his neighbor, and they both smirked. Nobody raised a paddle. $750, the auctioneer repeated. Folks, that's the minimum. 4 acres and a 22-room structure. Do I have $750? More silence. The auctioneer sighed. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hand was shaking. The paddle felt slippery in her fingers. She thought about Lily's broken shoes. She thought about Marcus's cough. She thought about the yellow eviction notice sitting on her kitchen table. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she raised her paddle. $750 from the lady in the back, the auctioneer said, sounding surprised. Do I hear $800? Nobody moved. $750 going once, $750 going twice. He paused, scanning the room. Sold to the lady in the back for $750. And just like that, Clara Whitfield, a broke single mother of 2 who could barely afford groceries, became the owner of a 22-room mansion that no one else in the entire county wanted. The reaction from the people in her life was immediate and unanimous. They thought she had lost her mind. Denise called that evening after Clara made the mistake of telling her. You did what? Her sister said, her voice climbing to a register that could shatter glass. Clara, please tell me you're joking. Please tell me you did not just spend your last $750 on a condemned house. It's not condemned, Clara said quietly. It needs work. But it needs to be demolished. Do you have any idea what it costs to renovate a house like that? Tens of thousands of dollars at minimum, probably hundreds of thousands. You can't even pay your electric bill, and you bought a mansion? A mansion that nobody else wanted? Did it occur to you that there might be a reason nobody else wanted it? It has 4 acres, Denise. It has land. It has space. It's a real property. It's a money pit. It's a disaster. You have 2 children to feed, Clara. On 2 children. And you just threw away the last of your money on a fantasy. What are you going to tell Lily and Marcus when there's no food in the refrigerator next week? Are you going to say, sorry, kids, Mommy bought a haunted house instead of buying dinner? Clara hung up the phone. Her hands were trembling and her eyes were burning, but she did not cry. She had made her decision. There was no going back now. The next morning, she loaded the kids into the car and drove out to Pinecrest Road to see the property for the first time. The drive took about 15 minutes from town, winding through the Virginia countryside past farms and forests and the occasional gas station. Pinecrest Road itself was narrow and lined with old-growth trees, whose branches formed a canopy overhead, blocking out the pale autumn sun. At the very end of the road, past a rusted iron gate that hung open on broken hinges, was the Hargrove mansion. Clara stopped the car and stared. It was enormous. That was the first thing she noticed. The house was absolutely enormous. It rose up from the overgrown grounds like something out of a Gothic novel, all dark brick and tall windows and peaked roof lines. The east wing, as advertised, had partially collapsed, and the roof there sagged dangerously, held up by what looked like sheer stubbornness. Ivy covered nearly every surface, climbing the walls and wrapping around the chimneys and creeping into the broken windows. The front porch, which must have been grand once, was rotting. The boards warped and split, the columns leaning at angles that defied physics. The grounds were wild. The 4 acres had not been maintained in decades, and nature had reclaimed everything. Bushes had grown into small trees. Trees had fallen and been left to rot where they lay. A stone fountain in the front yard was choked with weeds and standing water. A driveway that had once been gravel was now mostly mud. From the back seat, Lily pressed her face against the window and said in a very small voice, "Mama, are we going to live here?" And Marcus, who was 4 and did not understand any of what was happening, looked at the massive ruin of a house and said, "It's a castle." Clara took a deep breath. "It's going to be our home," she said. "It needs a lot of love, but it's ours." She got out of the car and helped the kids out, holding Marcus on her hip and taking Lily's hand. They walked together up the crumbling path to the front door, which was a massive oak thing with iron hardware that had gone green with age. Clara tried the handle. It was stuck. She had to put Marcus down and use both hands to force it. And when it finally gave way, the hinges screamed in protest, and the door swung open into darkness. The smell hit her first. The damp and dust and decay, the unmistakable odor of a building that had been sealed up and forgotten. But underneath it, there was something else. Something older. The faint scent of wood polish and dried flowers, the ghost of a house that had once been cared for. Clara stepped inside. The entrance hall was vast. The ceiling rose up 2 full stories, and a grand staircase swept upward from the center of the room, splitting into 2 at a landing where a massive stained glass window cast colored light across the dusty marble floor. The wallpaper was peeling. The chandelier that hung from the ceiling was thick with cobwebs and missing half its crystals. Plaster had fallen from the ceiling in several places, leaving white debris scattered across the floor like snow. But the bones were there. Clara could see it. Beneath the decay and the neglect, the house had been magnificent once. The woodwork was hand-carved. The banisters were mahogany. The fireplace in the front parlor was Italian marble, cracked but still beautiful. The floors, where they were not water-damaged, were hardwood of a quality that no one used anymore. This house had been built by people who cared about craft, and that craft had survived a century of neglect. Lily tugged at Clara's hand. "Mama, look," she said, pointing at the stained glass window. The morning light was coming through it, and the colors were dancing across the walls and floor, blues and reds and golds and greens, painting the ruined hall with beauty. Marcus clapped his hands and laughed. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time in months, she felt something that she had almost forgotten how to feel. It was not happiness exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was possibility. She spent the rest of that day exploring the house with the children. They moved carefully, avoiding the east wing entirely, and testing every floorboard before putting their weight on it. The house was a labyrinth, 22 rooms, the listing had said, and Clara counted at least that many. There were parlors and sitting rooms and bedrooms, and a library that still had books on its shelves, their pages yellow and swollen with moisture. There was a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and a pantry the size of Clara's entire apartment. There was a ballroom on the second floor, with a parquet floor and tall windows that looked out over the grounds. There was an attic that stretched the full length of the house, filled with old furniture and trunks and boxes that no one had opened in decades. Everything was damaged, everything needed repair. But everything was there. The house was waiting. It had been waiting for a very long time. That evening, back at the apartment, Clara sat at the kitchen table and made a plan. And she could not afford contractors. She could not afford an architect or an engineer. She could not afford anything, really. But she could work. She had been working her entire life. She knew how to use her hands. She knew how to learn. And she knew, with a certainty that she could not explain, that this house was not a mistake. It was an opportunity. It was the opportunity that everyone else had dismissed, the one that no one wanted, the one that had been sitting there, waiting for someone desperate enough and brave enough to say yes. She would fix it herself, room by room, day by day. She would use her days off and her early mornings and her late nights. She would learn from YouTube videos and library books and the old men at the hardware store who knew how things used to be built. She would do whatever it took because she had no other choice and because her children deserved better than what she had been able to give them. The first 2 weeks were brutal. Clara worked her regular jobs during the week and spent every spare moment at the house. She started with the basics. She cleared debris from the main rooms. She swept and mopped and scraped and scrubbed until her arms ached. She pulled ivy from the walls and trimmed the bushes blocking the windows. She patched the most dangerous holes in the roof with salvaged materials and plastic sheeting. She tested the plumbing and found that the pipes, while old, were mostly copper and still functional with some minor repairs. The electrical system was another matter entirely, but she found that the main panel in the basement was surprisingly intact, just disconnected. Every day, she brought Lily and Marcus with her. They played in the rooms she had already cleaned while she worked in the next one. Lily became her helper, holding tools and sweeping up dust and asking 1,000 questions about why things were built the way they were. Marcus mostly chased bugs and pretended the house was a castle full of dragons, which, given the size of some of the spiders Clara encountered, was not entirely inaccurate. The neighbors on Pinecrest Road noticed immediately. There were only a few houses along the road, and the people who lived there had grown accustomed to the Hargrove mansion being empty and derelict. They were not pleased to see someone moving in, particularly someone like Clara. Clara passed the mansion one afternoon, while Clara was outside, pulling weeds from what had once been a garden bed, and she stopped her car and rolled down the window. "Excuse me," Martha called out. "Are you the one who bought this place?" Clara stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Clara Whitfield." Martha looked at her, then looked at the house, then looked back at Clara. Her expression was the kind of polite contempt that certain people in certain small towns have perfected over generations. "Well, I don't know what you think you're going to do with it, but I hope you know that this property has been an eyesore for years, and the neighborhood association has been trying to get it demolished. We don't need someone making it worse." "I'm not trying to make it worse," Clara said. "I'm trying to fix it up." Martha laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Fix it up? Honey, that house needs a wrecking ball, not a fresh coat of paint. No offense, but do you even know what you're doing?" Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm learning." "Learning," Martha repeated, as if the word tasted bad. "Well, good luck with that. Just keep in mind, that if the county condemns that property, you'll be responsible for the demolition costs. That could run you $50,000 or more. I hope you've thought about that." She rolled up her window and drove away. Clara had not thought about that. She added it to the list of things she tried not to think about at 3 in the morning when she could not sleep. But she kept working. By the end of the 3rd week, something started to shift. The front parlor was clean. The floors had been swept and mopped and oiled. The fireplace had been cleared of debris, and the chimney was open. Clara had found a set of curtains in one of the attic trunks that were dusty but intact, and she had washed them and hung them in the parlor windows. She had also found an old rocking chair that needed only a new coat of finish to be perfectly functional, and she had set it by the fireplace. It was 1 room in a 22-room house, but it was done, and it was beautiful. Lily stood in the doorway of the parlor one afternoon, looking at what her mother had created. "It looks like a real house now, Mama," she said. "It is a real house," Clara said. "It's our house." That night, Clara made another decision. The eviction date at the apartment was in 10 days. She did not have the money to pay the back rent. She was going to lose the apartment no matter what. So instead of fighting it, she would move into the mansion. Not the whole mansion. Just the parlor and the kitchen and one of the smaller bedrooms upstairs that she had already cleaned and weatherproofed. It would be rough. There was no heating yet. The plumbing worked, but the water heater did not. But it would be theirs, and there would be no landlord, and no eviction notice, and no yellow envelope. She told Lily about the plan that evening while Marcus was asleep. She sat on the edge of the mattress and held her daughter's hand and explained, in the simplest terms she could, so that they were going to move to the big house on Pinecrest Road, that it would be different, that some things would be hard at first, that they would not have heat right away or hot water, but that it was their house and nobody could take it away from them. Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will we be okay?" Clara squeezed her hand. "We'll be okay. I promise." "Do you pinky promise?" Clara linked her pinky with her daughter's and held it tight. "So I pinky promise." They moved on a Saturday. Clara packed everything they owned into her old Honda Civic and made 4 trips between the apartment and the mansion. Their belongings were pitiful when she saw them spread out in the parlor. A few boxes of clothes, some kitchen supplies, a bag of toys, a few photo albums, the mattress that she strapped to the roof of the car. That was it. That was everything they had. Mrs. Patterson watched them load the car from her window on the 1st floor. Mrs. Patterson closed her fingers around the $20 bill. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. "I'm not taking it." Clara tried to give it back, but Mrs. Patterson held it tight. "I'm not taking it," she said. Mrs. Patterson closed her fingers around it and shook her head. "You take it, and you take care of those babies." Clara hugged her and drove away before the tears could start. The first night in the mansion was hard. The house made sounds that Clara had not noticed during the day. The old wood settled and creaked. The wind found its way through gaps in the windows and whistled through the halls. Marcus woke up crying at midnight, frightened by the dark and the unfamiliar sounds, and Clara held him in the rocking chair by the cold fireplace and sang to him until he fell back asleep. Lily did not cry, but Clara could see that she was awake, lying still in the dark, listening. In the morning, when sunlight came through the stained glass window in the entrance hall and filled the house with color, and Marcus laughed and tried to catch the light with his hands, and Lily smiled for the first time in days, and Clara thought, "We can do this. We can do this." She went back to work on Monday, dropping the kids at school and daycare before heading to the motel. Her manager at the motor lodge, a man named Gary with a permanent scowl and a coffee-stained tie, noticed that she had given a different address on her updated employee form. "Pinecrest Road?" he said. "That's the Hargrove place. You're living out there?" "Yes," Clara said. Gary stared at her. "You bought that dump?" "I did." He shook his head slowly. "No offense, Clara, but that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That place should have been torn down years ago. You're going to sink every penny you don't have into it, and in 6 months, you'll be right back where you started. To mark my words." Clara did not respond. She picked up her cleaning cart and went to work. Word spread quickly in Ashford. Small towns are like that. By the end of the week, it seemed like everyone knew about the single mother who had bought the Hargrove mansion for $750. The reactions ranged from disbelief to pity to open mockery. At Benny's diner, 2 of her regular customers, men who came in every Thursday night for the meatloaf special, Saul talked about it right in front of her, as if she were not there. "You hear about the girl who bought the Hargrove place?" one of them said. "The haunted house on Pinecrest? No way." $750, that's all it went for. Some single mom with 2 kids. Can you imagine? She's actually living there. Living there, in that death trap, with kids? On somebody ought to call CPS. Clara set their coffee down without a word and went to the back of the restaurant and stood in the walk-in cooler for 2 minutes, letting the cold air dry the tears on her cheeks. Then she went back out and finished her shift. But she did not stop working on the house. Every morning before dawn, she would get up and work for an hour before waking the children. Every evening after they were in bed, she would work for 2 more hours by flashlight. On her days off, when she worked from sunrise to sunset, she was tireless. She was relentless. She was driven by something deeper than stubbornness, something that she could not name, but that lived in the center of her chest and pushed her forward even when every muscle in her body was screaming at her to stop. And slowly, impossibly, the house began to change. The kitchen was next. Clara spent a full week cleaning it, stripping away decades of grime and neglect. She found that the original tile floor, cleaned it and replaced a few parts. She cleaned it and replaced a few parts. She found it a salvage yard, worked perfectly. The pantry shelves, built from solid oak, needed only sanding and oiling. She found dishes in one of the kitchen cabinets, a complete set of china with a delicate floral pattern, dusty but unchipped. She washed each piece by hand and set them on the shelves. Now when the kitchen started to look like a kitchen again. Then she tackled the master bedroom on the second floor. It was the largest bedroom in the house, with tall windows that faced west and caught the afternoon sun. The wallpaper was destroyed, but Clara scraped it off and found that the plaster underneath was mostly sound. She patched the cracks, sanded the walls smooth, and painted them a warm cream color using a gallon of paint she bought at a discount because the hardware store had mixed it wrong. The hardwood floor cleaned up beautifully. She found a bed frame in the attic that was solid walnut and only needed new bolts to hold together. Week by week, room by room, the mansion was coming back to life. And then, on a cold Thursday evening in late November, about 6 weeks after she had moved in, Clara made a discovery that changed everything. Not the big discovery, not yet. This was something smaller, something that served as a signpost pointing toward something much, much larger. She was in the library, sorting through the books on the shelves. Most of them were ruined by moisture, their pages swollen and their spines cracked. But some, on the higher shelves where the water had not reached, were intact. She was pulling them down one by one, checking their condition, when she noticed that the shelf itself, the back panel of the built-in bookcase, sounded different when she knocked on it. The other shelves produced a solid thud when she tapped them. This one produced a hollow sound. Clara put down the book she was holding and knocked again. Definitely hollow. She ran her fingers along the edge of the back panel and felt a slight gap, no more than a 1/4 inch, between the panel and the frame. She wedged her fingernails into the gap and pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled harder. Still nothing. It was a space about 2 feet deep, and it was a space about 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide. And inside that space, sitting on a narrow shelf, were 3 things. A leather journal, dark brown and cracked with age, a small brass key on a chain, and a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with time but was still legible. Clara's hands were trembling as she reached in and took out the journal, to 1952. Clara, 1952. Clara turned to the next page and began to read. What she found in those pages would keep her up all night. It would send her on a search through the house that would take weeks. And it would ultimately lead her to something so extraordinary, so impossibly valuable, so that it would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had ever doubted her. But that night, sitting on the floor of the library with a flashlight and a dead man's journal, Clara did not know any of that yet. All she knew was that Cornelius Hargrove had been hiding something in this house, something important, something he had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect, and she was going to find it. The journal was not easy reading. Cornelius Hargrove's handwriting, while precise, was small and cramped, and the ink had faded in places to the point where Clara had to hold the pages at different angles to make out the words. But what she found in those pages was extraordinary. Cornelius, it turned out, had not been the eccentric recluse that the town believed him to be. He had been something else entirely. According to the journal, the Hargrove family had not lost all their money in the Great Depression, as local legend held. They had lost most of it, yes. But Elias's grandfather, a man named Cornelius Hargrove, had been smarter than people gave him credit for. When the stock market crashed in 1929, Cornelius had already begun converting a significant portion of the family's wealth into tangible assets. Gold, silver, precious stones, rare artwork. He had done it quietly, over a period of years, using intermediaries and private dealers and channels that left no paper trail. And he had hidden those assets somewhere in the house. When Clara read this passage 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Cornelius Hargrove had hidden a fortune in this house, a fortune in gold and silver and precious stones and artwork. And he had told only one person where it was: his grandson, Elias. The journal entries that followed were a kind of treasure map, but not a straightforward one. Elias did not write down the exact location of the hidden wealth. He was too careful for that. Instead, he wrote in riddles and references, in cryptic passages that alluded to specific rooms and specific features of the house, without ever stating anything directly. He wrote about the room where music sleeps, and the eye that watches the western sun, and the mouth that drinks but never speaks. He wrote about a vault, a real vault, that Cornelius had commissioned to be built during the original construction of the house, hidden behind a wall, behind a floor, behind something that no one would ever think to look for. Clara stayed up until 4 in the morning reading the journal. She fell asleep on the library floor and was woken by Marcus climbing onto her chest and patting her face. "Mama, you slept on the floor," he said, as if this were the most interesting thing that had ever happened. "I did," she said, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Mama found something very interesting last night." "Was it a dragon?" Clara laughed. It was the first real laugh she had produced in months, and it felt strange and wonderful. Not a dragon, but maybe something just as good. She did not tell anyone about the journal, not Denise, not Mrs. Patterson, not anyone. She kept it hidden in the library, in the same secret compartment where she had found it, and she took it out each night after the children were asleep and studied it by flashlight, trying to decode Elias Hargrove's cryptic clues. The room where music sleeps. That could be the ballroom on the 2nd floor, or it could be a music room if the house had one. Clara began a systematic search, going room by room, knocking on walls and floors, looking for anything unusual. She found nothing in the ballroom. The walls were solid plaster over brick. The floor was parquet, and while she got on her hands and knees and tapped every single panel, none of them sounded hollow. The eye that watches the western sun. This one haunted her. She thought about it constantly. Looks outward. A window? The stained glass window? The window that looks outward? 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 The window that looks outward. 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 A window? The stained glass window in the entrance hall faced east, not west. But there were other windows. She checked them all, examining the frames and sills, pressing on the glass, looking for hidden mechanisms. Nothing. 2 more weeks passed. Clara continued to work on the house during the day and search for the vault at night. She was exhausted. She was running on 4 hours of sleep and sheer determination. But she would not stop. She could not stop. The journal was real. The brass key was real. There was something hidden in this house, and she was going to find it. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in early December, while she was cleaning the 4th bedroom on the 2nd floor, she found the next clue. She was pulling up a section of damaged carpet that had been laid over the original hardwood floor, and underneath the carpet, carved into one of the floorboards, she found a symbol. It was small, no more than 2 inches across, and it had been carved with precision, and then stained dark so that it was almost invisible against the wood. It was a compass rose, the kind you see on old maps, with an arrow pointing west. West. The eye that watches the western sun. Clara followed the arrow. It pointed directly at the wall, which was the exterior wall of the house on the west side. She knocked on it. Solid. She knocked higher. Solid. She knocked lower, near the baseboard, and there it was again. That hollow sound. The same hollow sound she had heard behind the bookcase in the library. Her heart was hammering. She knelt down and examined the baseboard. It looked normal. Just a wooden baseboard, painted white, like every other baseboard in the house. But when she pressed on it, if it really pressed, with both hands, she felt it give slightly. She pressed harder. Something clicked, and the baseboard swung inward, revealing a narrow opening at floor level, just large enough for a person to crawl through. Clara lay flat on her stomach and pointed her flashlight into the opening. The beam cut through the darkness and illuminated a narrow passage, about 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, that ran between the interior and exterior walls of the house. It was a hidden corridor, built right into the walls, invisible from either side, running who knew how far or to where. Clara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had found the beginning of the path. Now she needed to find where it led. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay on the mattress beside her children, listening to their breathing, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the narrow passage she had found behind the baseboard in the 4th bedroom. So every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. That dark opening, that corridor between the walls, that impossible space that had been hiding in plain sight for over a century, waiting for someone to find it. At 4 a.m, she could not wait any longer. She got up, dressed quietly in the dark, and crept through the house with her flashlight. The mansion was a different creature at night. The floors groaned under her weight. The shadows moved in ways that did not seem natural. The stained glass window in the entrance hall, which was so beautiful in the daylight, was just a dark shape against the wall now, giving nothing back. She climbed the stairs to the 4th bedroom and knelt in front of the baseboard panel. It was still open, the dark rectangle of the hidden passage waiting for her like a mouth. She took a deep breath, got down on her hands and knees, and crawled inside. The passage was tight. Clara was not a large woman, but even so, her shoulders brushed the walls on both sides. The air was stale and cold, and it smelled like old stone and something faintly metallic. Dust covered the floor in a thick layer that had not been disturbed in what must have been decades. Her flashlight beam bounced off rough-hewn wooden planks on either side, and overhead, the ceiling was so low that she could not stand up. She had to move on her hands and knees, crawling slowly forward into the darkness. The passage ran straight for about 15 feet, then turned sharply to the left. Clara followed it. It ran another 10 feet, then opened up slightly into a small alcove, barely 4 feet square, where she could sit up, but not stand. There was nothing in the alcove except dust and a few spider webs, and carved into the wooden beam above her head, another compass rose. This one had 2 arrows. One pointed back the way she had come. The other pointed down. Down. Clara looked at the floor of the alcove. It was made of the same wooden planks as the rest of the passage, but one of them, the one directly beneath the downward-pointing arrow, was slightly different. It was a shade darker than the others, as if it had been replaced at some point. She pressed on it. It did not give. She pressed harder. Nothing. She sat back and thought about it. Then she remembered the brass key she had found with the journal. She had left it in the library, through in the hidden compartment behind the bookshelf. She would have to go back for it. Clara crawled out of the passage, dusted herself off, and went down to the library. She retrieved the brass key and the journal, then went back upstairs and crawled into the passage again. In the alcove, she examined the darker plank more carefully with her flashlight and found, hidden in the grain of the wood, a tiny keyhole. It was no larger than a shirt button, and it had been disguised so expertly that you would never see it unless you were looking for it. She inserted the brass key. It fit perfectly. She turned it, and there was a soft mechanical click, and the plank shifted slightly. Clara pulled it up. It swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow vertical shaft with iron rungs set into the wall, descending into blackness. A ladder. Going down. Clara's hands were shaking. She pointed her flashlight down the shaft, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness after about 10 feet. She could not see the bottom. She could hear her own breathing, fast and shallow, and the hammering of her heart. And beneath all of that, from somewhere far below, the faintest sound of dripping water. She looked back toward the passage entrance, thinking about Lily and Marcus sleeping in the bedroom below. If something happened to her down there, if she fell, or got stuck, or the passage collapsed, on for a long time, thinking. Then she made 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 a long time thinking. Then she made a long time, 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 thinking. Then she made a long time 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 for a long time thinking. Then she made a decision that was perhaps the hardest one yet. She would not go down the shaft tonight. She would go in the morning, when the children were at school and daycare. She would leave a note, just in case. She would tell someone where she was going. But who? Who could she tell? Who? Well, the answer came to her the next morning while she was dropping Marcus off at daycare. There was a woman there, one of the daycare workers, named Helen Booker. Helen was in her early 60s, a quiet woman with kind eyes and steady hands, who had worked at the daycare for over 20 years. She had always been good to Marcus, and she had a way of looking at Clara that was not pitying or judgmental, but simply understanding, as if she recognized something in Clara that other people could not see. If I didn't come to pick up Marcus one day, would you make sure my kids were okay? Just until my sister could get here from Richmond? Helen's expression changed. The kindness was still there, but it was joined now by concern. Clara, is everything all right? Everything's fine. I just want to make sure there's a plan. To the mansion. Parked in the overgrown to the mansion. Parked in the overgrown driveway, and sat in the car for 5 minutes, gathering her courage. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs, and crawled into the passage for the 3rd time. In the alcove, she opened the trapdoor and stared down at the iron rungs disappearing into darkness. No, she had brought a better flashlight this time, one she had bought at the hardware store the day before, with money she really could not afford to spend. She had also brought a length of clothesline rope, which she tied around the beam at the top of the shaft as a safety measure. She looped the other end around her waist. Then, saying a prayer to no one in particular, she swung her legs into the shaft and began to climb down. The rungs were cold and slightly damp, but they were solid. Whoever had built this shaft had built it to last. Clara descended slowly, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it, counting as she went. 10 rungs, 20, 30. She was going deeper than she had expected, well below the first floor of the house now, into what must have been a sub-basement level that she had not known existed. The air grew colder with each rung, and the smell of damp stone grew stronger. At the 40th rung, her foot touched solid ground. She was at the bottom. Clara stepped off the ladder and swept her flashlight around. She was standing in a stone chamber, roughly circular, about 12 feet across. The walls were made of the same dark stone as the mansion's foundation, and the ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet. There was no furniture, no shelves, no obvious features at all. Just bare stone walls and a floor that was covered in a thin layer of dust and moisture. But directly across from the ladder, set into the far wall, was a door. It was not a regular door. It was heavy steel, painted black, with a large wheel lock in its center, like the kind you see on bank vaults in old movies. The metal was dull with age, but showed no signs of rust, which meant it had been treated with something to protect it from the moisture. Around the edges of the door, Clara could see rubber sealing strips, the kind used to keep a space airtight and watertight. This was not a closet or a storage room. This was a vault, a real vault, and engineered, sealed, and hidden beneath the house in a sub-basement that did not appear on any blueprint or floor plan. Clara approached the door. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She reached out and touched the wheel lock. The metal was cold. She tried to turn it. It would not move. Locked. Of course it was locked. She stepped back and looked at the door more carefully. There was a keyhole below the wheel lock, on larger than the one she had found in the alcove floor, but the same distinctive shape. She looked at the brass key in her hand. It was too small for this lock. This vault required a different key, or a combination, or both. Clara felt a wave of frustration so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. She had come so far. She had found the passage, the shaft, the chamber, the vault. And now she was standing in front of a locked door with no way to open it. She sat down on the cold stone floor and opened the journal. She had brought it with her, stuffed inside her jacket. She turned to the pages she had read so many times that she nearly had them memorized, the pages where Elias wrote about the vault and his grandfather's hidden fortune. She read them again, slowly, looking for anything she might have missed. And then she found it. A passage she had read before, but had not understood. Elias had written, "Grandfather always said that the mouth that drinks, but never speaks, holds the final answer." He laughed when he said it, the way he laughed when he knew something that no one else did. The fountain speaks to those who listen. The mouth that drinks, but never speaks. The fountain speaks to those who listen. Clara's mind raced. There was a fountain on the property, a stone fountain in the front yard, choked with weeds and standing water. She had walked past it 100 times. She had even pulled some of the weeds from around its base, but she had never looked at it carefully. She had never listened to it. She climbed back up the shaft, crawled out of the passage, and went outside. The December air bit at her cheeks as she walked across the overgrown grounds to the fountain. It was a large structure, maybe 5 feet in diameter, with a central column that had once supported some kind of figure or ornament that was now missing. She ran her hands over the stone, feeling. She ran her hands over the stone, feeling for cracks or seams or anything unusual. On the backside, hidden by a thick growth of ivy, she found something. There was a carved face in the stone, a grotesque face with an open mouth, the kind of decorative water spout you see on old European fountains. Water would have flowed from the mouth when the fountain was working. The mouth that drinks, but never speaks. Clara cleared the ivy and looked into the carved mouth. It was deep, deeper than it should have been for a simple water spout. She reached inside. Her fingers touched cold stone, then something else, something metal. She closed her fingers around it and pulled it out. It was a key, a large brass key, much bigger than the one she had found in the library. It was heavy and ornate, with a complex bit pattern that matched the large keyhole on the vault door. It had been sitting inside that stone mouth for decades, possibly since the house was built, waiting for someone to understand the riddle. Clara held the key in both hands and stared at it. She was shaking, not from the cold, from something else entirely, from the realization that this was real. All of it. The journal, the clues, the hidden passages, the vault. It was all real. And she was holding the key. She wanted to go straight back down to the vault. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to go now, right now, to run back inside and crawl through the passage and descend the shaft and put the key in the lock and turn it and find out what was behind that steel door. But she could not. It was almost time to pick up Marcus from daycare, and Lily would be getting off the school bus in an hour. She had to wait. That afternoon was the longest afternoon of Clara Whitfield's life. She picked up Marcus. She met Lily at the bus stop. She made dinner, macaroni and cheese from a box because it was cheap and the kids liked it. She helped Lily with her homework. She gave Marcus a bath. She read them both a story. She tucked them in and kissed them goodnight, and waited, sitting in the rocking chair in the parlor, watching the clock on the wall, until she was absolutely certain they were both deeply asleep. Then she went. She moved through the house like a ghost, to her flashlight cutting through the darkness, up the stairs, into the fourth bedroom, down on her hands and knees, through the passage, into the alcove, down the shaft, rung by rung, 40 rungs into the earth, until her feet touched the stone floor of the chamber. The vault door was exactly as she had left it, waiting, silent, immovable. Clara approached it with the large brass key in her hand. She inserted it into the keyhole below the wheel lock. It slid in smoothly, as if the lock had been oiled yesterday instead of decades ago. She turned the key. There was a deep, satisfying click, the sound of heavy tumblers falling into place. Then she gripped the wheel lock with both hands and turned it. It moved. Stiff at first, resisting, groaning with age and disuse. But it moved. Clara put her whole body into it, leaning back, pulling with everything she had. The wheel turned a quarter rotation, then half, then 3/4. And then, with a final mechanical clunk that echoed off the stone walls, the locking bolts retracted. Clara pulled the door. It was enormously heavy, but it was balanced on well-engineered hinges, and once it started moving, momentum took over. The door swung open slowly, revealing total darkness beyond. A rush of air came out of the vault, cool and dry and oddly clean, as if the seal had preserved whatever was inside in a kind of time capsule, untouched by moisture or decay. Clara raised her flashlight and pointed it into the vault, and then she stopped breathing. The vault was larger than she had expected. It was a room, a full-sized room, maybe 20 feet long and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough to stand in. The walls were lined with steel shelving, floor to ceiling on every side, and every shelf was full. The first thing Clara's eyes registered was the gold. It was everywhere. Gold bars, stacked in neat rows on the lower shelves, and each one about the size of a brick, gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. She counted the bars on one shelf. 12. She counted the shelves. 8 rows on each side, plus the back wall. She stopped counting because the numbers were becoming too large for her brain to process. Above the gold bars were wooden crates, dozens of them, each one carefully sealed and labeled in handwriting she recognized from the journal. Some were labeled in English, others in French or German. She opened the nearest one, prying off the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in velvet-lined compartments, were gemstones. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, diamonds, each one set in a small individual case with a handwritten card noting its weight and origin. The rubies were deep red, the color of old wine. The emeralds were green like forest light. The diamonds caught her flashlight beam and threw it back in 1,000 directions. On the top shelves, wrapped in protective cloth, were paintings. Clara was not an art expert, but even she could see that these were not amateur works. They were old, beautifully preserved, painted on canvas that had been carefully rolled and placed in protective tubes. She unrolled one and found herself looking at a landscape that took her breath away. A countryside scene with a quality of light that seemed to glow from within the paint itself. There was no signature she could read, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. Along the back wall, on a separate set of shelves, were smaller items: antique coins in leather pouches, pocket watches with jeweled faces, strings of pearls in wooden boxes, silver candlesticks and serving pieces, small sculptures in bronze and marble, a collection of rare books, each one sealed in a protective case, and at the very center of the back wall, on a shelf all by itself, was a leather-bound ledger. Clara took the ledger and opened it. It was written in the same hand as the journal, but this was not a diary. This was an inventory. A meticulous, detailed inventory of every single item in the vault. Each entry included a description, a date of acquisition, a source, and an estimated value. The entries started in 1926 and continued until 1951, the year before Elias began his journal. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the ledger. She turned to the last page, where Cornelius Hargrove, or perhaps Elias himself, had written a final summary. Total estimated value as of December 1951, $47,326,000. $47 million in 1951. Clara's knees gave way, and she sat down on the vault floor. Her mind was doing calculations it could barely handle. $47 million in 1951 was not the same as $47 million today. Adjusted for inflation, accounting for the appreciation of gold and precious gems and rare artwork over 7 decades, the contents of this vault were worth. She could not do the math. She did not have to. She knew it was an astronomical number, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more. She sat on the floor of the vault for a long time. She did not cry. She was beyond crying. She was in a state that she had never experienced before and would never be able to fully describe. It was not joy, not exactly. It was not relief, though relief was part of it. It was something closer to vertigo, the disorientation that comes from having the entire foundation of your reality shift beneath your feet. Yesterday, she had been a broke single mother who could not afford a nebulizer for her son's cough. Today, she was sitting in a vault full of gold and gemstones and artwork that was worth more money than she could comprehend. She thought about Lily asking, "Will we be okay?" She thought about Marcus saying, "Sure, it's a castle." She thought about Denise calling her purchase the dumbest thing she had ever done. She thought about Martha Bellingham and her condescending smile. She thought about Gary at the motel shaking his head. She thought about the men at the diner, suggesting someone should call CPS. She thought about every person who had looked at her with pity or contempt or amusement because she was a single mother who had spent her last $750 on a ruined mansion. And then, finally, sitting on the cold floor of a vault, hidden beneath a house that no one else had wanted, Clara Whitfield began to laugh. It started small, a breath that was half laugh and half sob, and then it grew, filling the vault with a sound that those stone walls had never heard before. She laughed until tears ran down her face. She laughed until her stomach hurt. She laughed because the alternative was to scream, and if she started screaming, she was not sure she would ever stop. None were asleep upstairs, and she needed to were asleep upstairs, and she needed to get back to them. But she also needed to think. She needed to think very carefully about what to do next, because what she did next would determine everything. She could not simply announce that she had found a vault full of treasure. That would create problems she was not equipped to handle, and legal problems, tax problems, security problems, people problems. She did not know the law regarding found property or hidden assets, or tax obligations on discovered wealth. She did not know if there were heirs who might have a claim. She did not know if the county or the state could seize the contents. She did not know anything, and ignorance in a situation like this could be catastrophic. She needed help, professional help, a lawyer, an accountant, an appraiser, people who understood these things. But those people cost money, and Clara did not have money. She also did not know who to trust. In a small town like Ashford, a secret like this would spread like wildfire if even one wrong person found out. And if the wrong people learned about it before she had established legal ownership and protection, she could lose everything. Clara carefully closed the vault door. She did not lock it, because she was not sure if it would lock again from the outside. She climbed back up the shaft, crawled through the passage, and emerged into the 4th bedroom. It was almost 2 in the morning. She checked on the children, both asleep. Marcus was snoring softly, and Lily had kicked off her blankets, which Clara tucked back around her. Then Clara sat at the kitchen table, the same way she had sat at the table in her old apartment on the night this whole journey began, and she made a plan. The first thing she needed was information. Before she talked to anyone, before she spent money she did not have on lawyers and accountants, she needed to understand her legal position. She went to the library the next day, the public library where this entire story had started, when she overheard 2 men talking about a tax auction, and she sat down at one of the computers and began to research. She spent 3 days at that library, reading everything she could find about property law, treasure trove law, and the legal rights of homeowners regarding items found on their property. What she learned was both encouraging and complicated. In Virginia, the legal principle was relatively straightforward. When you buy a property at a tax auction, you buy everything that is permanently attached to or contained within that property. The vault was built into the foundation of the house. It was as much a part of the property as the walls and the roof. And the contents of the vault, placed there by the original owner of the property, were part of the property itself. There was no separate claim. There were no hidden heirs with legal standing, because the property had been seized for unpaid taxes and sold free and clear at public auction. Clara had bought the property. The vault was part of the property. The contents of the vault belonged to Clara. But there were complications. The IRS would want its share. Found wealth, regardless of how it was found, only would need someone who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. There was also the question of authentication and appraisal. The gold bars needed to be assayed. The gemstones needed to be evaluated by certified gemologists. The artwork needed to be examined by experts who could determine provenance and authenticity. The rare books and antiques needed their own specialists. This was not something Clara could do herself. It was not something any one person could do. It would take a team of professionals working over a period of months, and all of that cost money she did not have. Clara was sitting at the library computer on the third day, feeling overwhelmed, when Helen Booker walked in. Helen had the afternoon off from the daycare and had come to the library to return some books. She spotted Clara and walked over. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Helen said. Clara looked up at her. She had dark circles under her eyes from 3 nights of barely sleeping. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her fingernails were dirty from working on the house. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who was running on empty. "Helen, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest." "Always. Do you know any lawyers? Good ones. The kind who would help someone even if they couldn't pay right away?" Helen sat down across from her. "What kind of trouble are you in, Clara?" "I'm not in trouble. At least, I don't think I am. But I need legal advice, and I need someone I can trust." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My nephew, James Booker. He's a lawyer in Charlottesville. Does property law, or estate law, that sort of thing. He's a good man. Went to UVA on a scholarship, first in his family to go to college. He wouldn't turn you away just because you're short on money. Would he keep a confidence? Even something big?" Helen looked at her steadily. "James keeps every confidence. That's why his clients trust him. Clara, whatever this is, you can tell him. And if you want, you can tell me. I'm not going anywhere." Clara looked at Helen for a long time. She thought about all the people who had let her down. Derek, who had walked out on his family. Denise, who had called her stupid. Gary, who had predicted her failure. Martha, who had laughed in her face. She thought about how hard it was to trust anyone when everyone you trusted had either abandoned you or belittled you. But Helen had never done either of those things. Helen had simply been kind, day after day, without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, kindness is the most radical thing in the world. "Helen," Clara said, "I need to tell you something. But you have to promise me, absolutely promise me, that you won't tell anyone. Not anyone." "I promise." Clara took a deep breath. "I found something in my house, in the mansion, something hidden, something valuable." Helen raised an eyebrow. "How valuable?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words still did not feel real when she said them. "I think it might be worth hundreds of millions of dollars." The silence that followed was one of the loudest silences Clara had ever experienced. Helen stared at her for a full 10 seconds without blinking. Then she leaned back in her chair and said very quietly, "I'm calling James." James Booker arrived in Ashford 3 days later. He was a tall man in his mid-30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm, measured way of speaking that immediately put Clara at ease. He drove a sensible sedan and wore a suit that was nice, but not flashy. He looked like someone who cared more about doing good work than about impressing people, and Clara liked him immediately. She took him to the mansion. She showed him the library and the hidden compartment. She showed him the journal and the brass keys. She led him through the passage, down the shaft, and into the vault. James Booker stood in the middle of that vault and turned in a slow circle, his flashlight sweeping across the gold bars and the wooden crates and the paintings and the shelves of precious objects, and he did not say a word for nearly 3 minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Clara, do you understand what you have here? I'm starting to. This is not just valuable. This is historically significant. Some of these paintings, if they are what I think they are, could be masterworks that have been missing from the art world for nearly a century. The gold alone, based on current market prices. He trailed off, doing mental calculations. You're looking at something in the range of $300 million, possibly more. $300 million. Clara had to lean against the wall to keep from falling down. We need to do this right, James said, his lawyer's mind already working. We need to establish a clear chain of custody. We need to document everything, photograph everything, inventory everything. We need to get appraisers in here, but only people we trust completely. We need to set up a legal structure to protect you and your children. We need to deal with the tax implications, which are going to be significant but manageable. And we need to keep this absolutely quiet until we have everything in order. How long will all that take? Months, maybe a year. But Clara, listen to me. You have the legal right to everything in this vault. I've already looked into the property records. The tax auction was conducted properly. There are no outstanding liens, no competing claims, no heirs withstanding. You bought this property fair and square for $750, and everything in it belongs to you. Clara felt the tears coming and did not try to stop them. Everything? Everything. She thought about Lily's broken shoes, and the men at the diner who said someone, and the men at the diner who said someone should call CPS. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she was going to keep her children fed and clothed and sheltered for one more month. James, she said, her voice breaking, my son needs a doctor. He has this cough that won't go away, and I haven't been able to afford the treatment. James put his hand on her shoulder. We'll take care of Marcus first. We'll take care of everything. But one step at a time. Over the next several weeks, James Booker set the wheels in motion. He assembled a small, carefully vetted team of professionals. A tax attorney from Washington, who specialized in asset recovery. A certified appraiser from New York, who had worked with the Smithsonian. A gemologist from Richmond. An art historian from the University of Virginia. Each of them was bound by strict confidentiality agreements. Each of them was paid from a fund that James set up using a small portion of the gold bars as collateral. The first tangible conversion of Cornelius Hargrove's hidden fortune into modern-day resources. The appraisal process took time. Each item had to be examined, authenticated, photographed, cataloged, and valued. The gold bars were assayed and found to be pure, minted by a Swiss refinery that had been in operation since the 1800s. The gemstones were evaluated one by one, and the gemologist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been appraising precious stones for 30 years, told Clara that the emerald collection alone was one of the finest she had ever seen outside of a museum. The art historian, a professor named Dr. Michael Torres, examined the paintings and made a discovery that sent shockwaves through his quiet academic world. On 3 of the paintings were works by artists whose other pieces hung in major museums around the world. They had been purchased privately by Cornelius Hargrove in the 1920s and had been listed as lost for decades. As the appraisal progressed, the numbers grew, and grew, and grew. The initial estimate of $300 million turned out to be conservative. The gold alone was worth over $90 million at current market prices. The gemstones were valued at approximately $65 million. And the artwork, including the 3 recovered masterworks, was estimated at over $100 million. The rare books, the antique coins, the silver, the other collectibles, they added up to another $70 million. The final number, when everything was tallied, when every bar of gold and every gemstone and every painting and every rare book had been examined and authenticated and valued, was $327 million. $327 million. Not called her with the final number. The same called her with the final number. The same library where she had found the journal. the same library, where this impossible journey had begun. She listened to him say the number, and she said, "Can you say that again?" And he said it again, and she said, "One more time." And he said it one more time. And then she set the phone down on the table and sat very still for a very long time. Lily found her there 20 minutes later, sitting in the library with tears streaming down her face. "Mama, why are you crying? Are you sad?" Clara picked up her daughter and held her tight. "No, baby, I'm not sad. I'm the opposite of sad." "What's the opposite of sad?" Clara thought about it. "Safe," she said. "The opposite of sad is safe." That evening, for the first time since moving into the mansion, Clara cooked a real dinner. Not macaroni from a box, not canned soup. She drove to the grocery store and bought chicken and fresh vegetables and rice and butter and all the things she had been walking past for months because she could not afford them. She bought a gallon of milk and a box of cereal and fresh fruit and bread and cheese and a chocolate bar for Lily and animal crackers for Marcus. She spent $43, which was more than she usually spent on groceries in a week, and she did not look at the total when she swiped her card. Back at the mansion, she cooked in the kitchen that she had restored, on the cast-iron stove that she had brought back to life with her own hands, using the china dishes with the delicate floral pattern that she had washed one by one. She set the kitchen table with cloth napkins she had found in the attic. She lit candles, and she served her children a meal that, for the first time in longer than she could remember, was not a compromise. Lily looked at the table and said, "Are we having a party?" "Yes," Clara said. "We're having a party." "What are we celebrating?" Clara looked at her daughter and then at her son, who was already reaching for the animal crackers with both hands, and she felt a fullness in her chest that she had not felt since before Derek left. Since before the bills started piling up. Since before the world started telling her that she was not enough. "We're celebrating us," she said. "We're celebrating this house. We're celebrating that we're here, together, and that we're going to be okay." "You always said we'd be okay," Lily said. "I did. And I meant it." "I know," Lily said, with the absolute certainty that only a 7-year-old can have. "I always believed you, Mama." Clara reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Thank you, Lily. That means more than you will ever know." But the hardest part, or the part that Clara had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, was still to come. Because a secret like this could not stay hidden forever. And when the people of Ashford learned what Clara Whitfield had found in the house they had mocked her for buying, the reaction would be unlike anything the town had ever seen. And some of those reactions would not be kind. The secret held for almost 3 months. 3 months of appraisers coming and going in unmarked cars. On 3 months of James Booker making quiet phone calls to tax attorneys and estate specialists and museum curators who had to sign confidentiality agreements before they were even told what city the discovery was in. 3 months of Clara going to work at the motor lodge and the diner, cleaning rooms and serving coffee, smiling when people asked how the house was coming along, saying it was fine, just fine, everything was fine, while underneath her worn-out shoes and her second-hand clothes and her tired smile, she was sitting on a fortune that would have made every person in Ashford County lose their mind. But secrets in small towns have a half-life, and this one was no exception. It started with a delivery truck. One of the appraisers had arranged for a specialized art transport company to bring climate-controlled crates to the mansion for the eventual removal and secure storage of the paintings. The truck was unmarked, but it was large, and it had to navigate the narrow length of Pinecrest Road to reach the property. Martha Bellingham, who missed nothing that happened on her street, was standing in her front yard when the truck rumbled past. She called her friend Doris that evening. Doris called her sister-in-law Janet. Janet mentioned it to her husband, who worked at the county assessor's office. And by the next morning, someone at the assessor's office was pulling up the property records for 14 Pinecrest Road and noticing that the new owner had recently filed paperwork through a Charlottesville attorney establishing a legal trust associated with the property. A trust. For a condemned mansion that had sold for $750. Within 48 hours, the Ashford Gazette ran a small item in its local news section. New owner of historic Hargrove Estate files property trust. It was only 3 paragraphs. It did not mention Clara by name. It did not mention a vault, or a fortune, or anything specific at all. But it was enough. The phone calls started that afternoon. Denise called first. "Clara, what is going on? Janet Howell just told me you set up some kind of legal trust for that house. What are you doing? Are you in some kind of legal trouble?" "I'm not in trouble, Denise." "Then why do you need a lawyer? Why do you need a trust? Clara, you can barely feed your children, and you're spending money on lawyers? This is exactly what I was afraid of. That house is going to ruin you." "Denise, I need you to listen to me. I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" There was a long pause. "Trust you?" "Clara, the last time I trusted you, you spent your grocery money on a condemned building. Forgive me if my confidence is a little shaken." Clara closed her eyes. "I understand. But please, just give me a little more time, a few more weeks, and then I'll explain everything." Denise hung up without saying goodbye. Gary at the motor lodge was next. He caught Clara in the break room the following day. "I hear you've got lawyers involved with that house of yours," he said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "What happened? Did the roof finally fall in? Did the county come after you for code violations? I told you this would happen. That place is a liability. You should cut your losses and walk away before it drags you under." Clara looked at him. She had worked for this man for over 2 years. She had cleaned his motel rooms without complaint, had come in on her days off when he asked, had never called in sick even when she was running a fever. And not once in all that time had he ever said anything to her that was not dismissive or condescending. He did not see her as a person. He saw her as a pair of hands that pushed a cleaning cart. And standing there in the break room, looking at his smug expression, Clara made a decision that she had been wanting to make for a very long time. "Gary, I appreciate the concern, but I think it's time I moved on." He blinked. "Moved on? You're quitting? I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice." Gary stared at her for a moment, then laughed. "Quit? And do what? You can barely make rent as it is. Where are you going to go?" "Home," Clara said. "I'm going home." She walked out of the break room and finished her shift. It was the last full shift she would ever work at the Ashford Motor Lodge. James Booker had advised her to wait, to keep everything quiet until the legal structures were fully in place and the tax situation was resolved. But events were moving faster than plans could contain them. The Gazette article had opened a crack, and curiosity was pouring through it like water through a broken dam. People were asking questions. People were watching the mansion. People were talking. And then Dr. Michael Torres, the art historian from UVA, published a paper. He did not mean to blow Clara's secret wide open. He was an academic, and academics publish papers. That is what they do. He had been so excited by the discovery of the 3 lost masterworks that he could not contain himself. He wrote a paper for an art history journal about the recovery of previously unknown works, and while he was careful not to name Clara or give the exact location, he mentioned a private residence in Central Virginia and a collection assembled in the 1920s by an American textile magnate. It did not take long for people to connect the dots. The story broke on a Tuesday. It was not the Ashford Gazette this time. It was the Richmond Times-Dispatch, which ran a front-page feature with the headline, "Lost Masterworks, Discovered in Hidden Vault of Virginia Mansion." The article named the Hargrove estate. It named Clara Whitfield. It described the vault, the gold, the gemstones, the artwork. It quoted unnamed sources who estimated the total value of the discovery at over $300 million. By Wednesday morning, there were television news vans parked along Pinecrest Road. Clara stood at the window of the master bedroom, the room she had scraped and sanded and painted with her own hands, and watched the vans arrive. There were 3 at first, then 5, then 8. Reporters stood in front of the mansion's iron gate with their microphones and cameras, doing live shots for the morning news. A helicopter circled overhead. Neighbors gathered at the edges of their properties, staring. James arrived within the hour. He had anticipated this possibility and had already prepared a strategy. "We're going to control this narrative," he told Clara. "We're going to hold a press conference. You're going to tell your story, on your terms, in your own words. And then we're going to let the lawyers handle everything else." "I don't know if I can do that," Clara said. "Stand up in front of all those cameras and talk. You crawled through a hidden passage in the walls of a 100-year-old mansion. You climbed down a 40-foot shaft into a sub-basement that doesn't appear on any blueprint. Why, you solved riddles left by a dead man and opened a vault that hadn't been touched in 70 years. Clara, you can do anything." The press conference was held on the front lawn of the Hargrove mansion on a cold Friday afternoon in late February. James had arranged for a podium and a microphone and had invited every news outlet that had requested access. There were cameras from 4 local stations, 2 national networks, and at least a dozen print reporters. The crowd of onlookers stretched all the way down Pinecrest Road. Clara stood behind the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. She was wearing a new blouse that Helen had helped her pick out, and she had done her hair for the first time in months, and she was terrified. But she was also something else. She was ready. She spoke without notes. She told them everything from the beginning. And she told them about the eviction notice and the 2 jobs and the $812 in her checking account. She told them about overhearing the men at the library and the $750 auction and the investors who would not bid. She told them about Denise telling her it was the dumbest thing she had ever done. She told them about Martha Bellingham suggesting the house needed a wrecking ball. She told them about Gary at the motel shaking his head. She told them about the men at the diner who said someone should call CPS. She told them about moving into the mansion with her 2 children, about sleeping on a mattress on the floor, about working by flashlight, about restoring the house room by room, teaching herself plumbing and painting and carpentry from library books and YouTube videos, about Lily asking, "Will we be okay?" and Clara promising that they would be. And then she told them about the journal, the hidden compartment in the library, the brass key, the cryptic riddles, the passage behind the baseboard, the shaft descending 40 feet into the earth, the fountain and the stone mouth that held the vault key for decades, the steel door and the wheel lock, and the moment she pulled it open and shone her flashlight inside and saw the gold gleaming back at her. She told them the final number. $327 million. The crowd was silent. The cameras flashed. The reporters held their microphones forward, mouths open, waiting for more. Clara looked directly into the nearest camera and said, "I want to be clear about something. I did not find this fortune because I was lucky. I found it because I was desperate. I found it because I had no other options. I bought a house that nobody wanted because I was about to be homeless, and I fixed it up because I could not afford to pay anyone else to do it. And I searched every inch of it because a dead man's journal told me there was something hidden inside. Every person in this town told me I was crazy. Every person told me I was going to fail. And I want every single mother out there, every person who has ever been told they are not enough, every person who has been laughed at for daring to hope, I want you to know that the people who doubt you are not always right. Sometimes the thing that everyone says is worthless turns out to be the most valuable thing in the world. The applause started slowly, and then built into something enormous, rolling across the lawn like thunder. Clara stood at the podium and let it wash over her, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. The aftermath was both overwhelming and deeply satisfying. Martha Bellingham was among the first to change her tune, so she appeared at Clara's front door 3 days after the press conference, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a smile that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. "Clara, dear, I just wanted to stop by and say how wonderful I think it is, what you've done with the place. I always said this house had potential. Didn't I say that? I'm sure I said that." Clara looked at her. "You said it needed a wrecking ball." Martha's smile flickered but held. "Well, I may have said something like that in the heat of the moment, but I certainly didn't mean it. I could always see that you had a vision. And the results speak for themselves, don't they? The house looks marvelous. You know, I was thinking, we should get together for coffee sometime. Neighbors should be friends, don't you think?" Clara took the casserole. "Thank you for this, Martha. I appreciate the gesture." Of course. And if you ever need anything at all, you just let me know. We're neighbors, after all." Clara watched her walk back down the path, her heels sinking into the soft ground of the yard that Clara had cleared with her own hands. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it again. Denise called the day after the news broke. She called 17 times before Clara picked up. When Clara finally answered, there was a silence on the other end that lasted so long, Clara thought the call had dropped. I'm sorry," Denise finally said. Her voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry." "For what, exactly?" "For everything. For calling you stupid. For saying you threw away your money. For not supporting you when you needed me. For every terrible thing I said. I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. You told me I was going to tell my children there was no food because Mommy bought a haunted house." Denise made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a cry. I know I said that, and I will never forgive myself for it. Clara, you are the bravest person I have ever known, and I have spent the last 6 months being too stupid and too scared to see it." Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the nights she had wanted to call her sister, wanted someone to talk to, wanted just one person in her family to tell her she was doing the right thing. And Denise had not been that person. She had been the opposite of that person. She had made the hardest time in Clara's life even harder. But she was still her sister. And Clara was tired of being alone. "You hurt me, Denise. You really hurt me." "I know. But you're my sister, and my kids love their aunt. So if you want to be part of our lives, the door is open. But I need you to understand something. I made my own way. I did this by myself. And I need you to respect that, even when you don't agree with my choices. I do respect it. I respect you more than I have ever respected anyone in my entire life." They talked for another hour. It was not a fix. Trust that has been broken takes a long time to rebuild, and words spoken in cruelty leave marks that do not fade easily. But it was a start. And for Clara, who had been carrying the weight of her family's disapproval like a stone on her back, it felt like setting down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. Gary found out from the television news. He was sitting in the front office of the Motor Lodge, watching the noon broadcast on the small TV behind the counter, when Clara's face appeared on the screen. He watched the entire report with his mouth open. Then he called Clara's cell phone. She did not answer. He called again. She did not answer. He sent a text message that said, "Clara, I had no idea. Congratulations. Your job is always here if you need it." Clara read the text and deleted it. The men from the diner, the ones who had suggested calling CPS, saw the news too. One of them came into Benny's the following Thursday, the night Clara was scheduled to work. She was not there, of course. She had already given her notice at the diner as well. The one who found all that treasure. She's a one who found all that treasure. She's a millionaire now, like 100 times over. The man looked at his meatloaf and did not say anything for a long time. In the weeks that followed, James Booker worked tirelessly to secure Clara's position. The tax situation, as expected, was complex. The IRS classified the discovery as found property, which was taxable as ordinary income. The federal tax bill alone was staggering. But James and his team of tax attorneys negotiated a structured arrangement that allowed Clara to liquidate assets gradually over time, minimizing the tax burden while still satisfying all legal obligations. The first assets to be sold were a portion of the gold bars, which were purchased by a consortium of precious metals dealers for just over $40 million. After taxes and legal fees, Clara received a net payment of approximately $22 million, deposited into an account that James had set up in her name. $22 million. Clara stared at the number on the bank statement for a very long time. Then she made a list. The first item on the list was Marcus's medical treatment. She called the pediatrician's office and scheduled an appointment. When the receptionist pulled up Marcus's file and saw the outstanding balance, she started to explain the payment plan options. Clara interrupted her. "I'd like to pay the balance in full today, and I'd like to schedule a comprehensive evaluation for my son. Whatever tests he needs, whatever treatments he needs, I want them all." There was a pause. "All of them. All of them." Marcus got his nebulizer. He got a full allergy panel and a respiratory evaluation, and a referral to a pediatric pulmonologist who put him on a treatment plan that cleared up his cough within 3 weeks. Clara sat in the examination room, watching her son breathe clearly for the first time in months, and she pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound. The second item on the list was Lily's shoes. Clara took her daughter to a real shoe store, not Goodwill, not a discount bin, but a real store where a salesperson measured her feet and fitted her properly. Lily tried on 6 pairs and chose a pair of red sneakers that she declared were the most beautiful shoes in the world. She wore them out of the store and did not take them off for 3 days, not even to sleep. The third item on the list was the house itself. Clara hired a contractor, a real contractor, to a man named Tom Winters, who specialized in historic restoration and who understood that the Hargrove mansion was not just a building, but a piece of history. Tom brought in a crew of 12, and over the next 4 months, they did everything that Clara had been unable to do on her own. They rebuilt the collapsed east wing. They replaced the roof. They restored the foundation. They rewired the entire electrical system and installed modern plumbing while preserving the original fixtures. And they refinished every hardwood floor, replastered every wall, restored every piece of hand-carved woodwork. They rebuilt the front porch with materials that matched the original construction, replacing rotting boards and straightening columns, and hanging a new front door that was a replica of the original oak door with iron hardware. Only this one opened smoothly on oiled hinges. Clara supervised every detail. She was there every day, walking through the house with Tom, making decisions about colors and finishes and hardware. She insisted on preserving the character of the house. She did not want it modernized beyond recognition. She wanted it to look the way Cornelius Hargrove had intended it to look when he built it in 1906. She wanted the mahogany banisters, and the Italian marble fireplace, and the stained glass window, and the blue and white mosaic floor in the kitchen. She wanted all of it, restored to its original glory. And slowly, magnificently, the Hargrove mansion came back to life. The stained glass window was cleaned and repaired, and when the morning sun came through it, the colors danced across the entrance hall, the way they had when Lily first pointed at them and said, "Mama, look." The chandelier was restored, every crystal replaced, and when Clara turned it on for the first time, the entrance hall blazed with light. The gardens were replanted, the fountain was rebuilt, and water flowed from the carved stone mouth for the first time in decades, the mouth that drinks but never speaks, finally speaking again. The town of Ashford watched the transformation with a complicated mix of emotions. There was awe, certainly. The mansion had been a ruin for so long that most people had forgotten it had ever been beautiful, and seeing it restored was like watching someone come back from the dead. But there was also shame, because the people of Ashford hadn't just ignored Clara Whitfield. They had actively mocked her. They had laughed at her dreams and questioned her fitness as a mother, and predicted her failure with the comfortable certainty of people who have never had to bet everything on a single desperate choice. Clara did not seek revenge. She did not gloat. She did not stand on her restored front porch and shout, "I told you so," at the people who had doubted her, though she had every right to. Instead, died to supporting single parents and families, to supporting single parents and families in financial crisis in Ashford County. The foundation provided emergency housing assistance, child care subsidies, job training, and educational scholarships. It was run by a board that included Helen Booker, James Booker, and Clara herself. The second thing she did was buy the building where she and the children had lived in their cramped two-bedroom apartment, the building where Mrs. Patterson still lived on the first floor. She bought the entire building, renovated every unit, reduced the rents to affordable levels, and guaranteed that no tenant would ever face eviction for a temporary inability to pay. She named the building Patterson House, after the woman who had pressed a $20 bill into her hand and told her to buy the children something warm. When Mrs. Patterson found out, she sat in her apartment and cried for an hour. Then she called Clara and said, "Child, you didn't have to do that." "I know," Clara said, "but you gave me $20 when I had nothing. That's not something I forget." The third thing she did was set up college funds for Lily and Marcus, and she met with a financial advisor and established trusts that would pay for their education, wherever they wanted to go, whatever they wanted to study. She also set aside a separate fund for each of them that they would receive when they turned 25, enough to give them a strong start in life without being so much that it removed the need for them to work and build something of their own. Because Clara understood something that many people with sudden wealth do not. She understood that money is not the point. Money is a tool. It opens doors and removes obstacles and provides security. But it doesn't give you purpose. It doesn't give you pride. It doesn't give you the feeling you get when you scrape wallpaper off a plaster wall and find that the wall underneath is sound. It does not give you what Clara had found in the act of restoring a house that everyone said was beyond saving, which was the knowledge that she was capable of more than anyone, including herself, had ever believed. On a warm Saturday afternoon in late April, 8 months after she had stood in an auction room and raised a paddle that changed her life, Clara hosted a gathering at the Hargrove mansion. She invited everyone: Helen and James, Mrs. Patterson, Tom Winters and his crew, the teachers from Lily's school, the staff from Marcus's daycare, the regulars from Benny's diner, including the new waitress who had taken Clara's place, even Martha Bellingham, who arrived in a new dress and spent the entire afternoon complimenting the restoration with the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to rewrite history. Denise came from Richmond. She arrived early and stood in the entrance hall, looking up at the restored chandelier and the stained glass window and the polished mahogany banisters, and she shook her head slowly. "Clara," she said, "I cannot believe this is the same house." "It's not the same house," Clara said. "It's better, but tearing you down. You're here now. Is tearing you down. You're here now. Is that enough?" Clara put her arm around her sister's shoulder. "It's a start." The children played in the garden, while the adults wandered through the house, marveling at the transformation. Lily had invited 3 friends from school, and they ran through the restored rooms, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings, filling the house with a sound it had not heard in decades. Marcus chased them on his sturdy little legs, no longer coughing, his lungs clear and strong, shouting, "This is my castle! This is my castle!" to anyone who would listen. Helen found Clara standing alone on the back porch, looking out at the 4 acres of land that were now green and trimmed and beautiful. The fountain was running, water cascading from the stone mouth into the rebuilt basin, catching the afternoon sunlight. "You okay?" Helen asked. "I'm okay." "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. Not anymore." Clara smiled. "I know. But being strong is kind of a habit at this point." Helen laughed. "Fair enough." She paused. "James told me something the other day. He said that in all his years of practicing law, he has never seen anyone handle a situation like this with as much grace and intelligence as you have. He said you could have made a dozen mistakes along the way, any one of which could have cost you everything. But you didn't. You made every right decision at every critical moment." "I made plenty of wrong decisions," Clara said. "I just got lucky." "No," Helen said firmly. "You did not just get lucky. You worked harder than anyone I've ever met. You believed in something when nobody else did. And you were brave enough to crawl into a dark passage in the middle of the night when most people would have sealed it up and pretended it wasn't there. That's not luck, Clara. That's character." Clara looked at the fountain, at the water flowing from the mouth that had held a key for 70 years. She thought about Elias Hargrove, a lonely man in a big house, keeping his grandfather's secret until the day he died. She wondered if he had ever imagined that the person who would finally unlock his vault would be a broke single mother who bought his house for $750. She liked to think he would have appreciated the irony. "Well, Helen, can I tell you something?" "Anything." "That night, when I first opened the vault, when I saw all that gold and all those jewels and all those paintings, do you know what my first thought was?" "What?" "My first thought was that I could finally take Marcus to the doctor. Not the gold, not the paintings, not the $300 million. My son's cough. That's what $327 million meant to me in that moment. It meant my little boy could breathe." Helen reached over and took Clara's hand and held it. They stood together on the porch, watching the water flow, listening to the children laugh, saying nothing at all, because sometimes the most important things don't need words. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Clara sat on the edge of Lily's bed. Marcus was already asleep in his room, the room that had been fully restored with new paint and new furniture and a bed shaped like a castle. Because when you are 4 years old and you believe you live in a castle, your bed should reflect that belief. Lily was propped up against her pillow, reading a book. Her red sneakers were on the floor beside the bed, finally retired for the night. She looked up when Clara sat down. "Mama?" "Yes, baby. Remember when we first moved here? And it was dark and cold and scary?" "I remember. And I asked you if we were going to be okay." I remember that, too. Lily closed her book and looked at her mother with those serious 7-year-old eyes that saw more than most adults ever would. We're okay now, aren't we? Clara leaned forward and kissed her daughter's forehead. Yes, Lily. We're okay now. Like, really okay. Not just you. Saying it to make me feel better, okay? Clara laughed softly. Really okay. Like, actually. Truly. All the way okay. Lily nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I like this house, and I like my room, and I like that Marcus doesn't cough anymore, and I like my red shoes. I like all those things too. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mama, when you bought this house, and everybody said you were crazy, were you scared? Clara thought about it. She thought about the night at the kitchen table with the eviction notice. She thought about the auction and the paddle and the silence in the courtroom. She thought about crawling through a hidden passage in the dark. She thought about climbing down a 40-foot shaft into the earth. She thought about standing in front of a vault door with a brass key in her trembling hand. I was terrified, she said honestly, every single day. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Why? Clara reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Because you and Marcus needed me to. Because being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you keep going, even though you're afraid. That's what courage is, Lily. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done in spite of it. Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing a constitutional question. Then she said, I think you're the bravest person in the world, Mama. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you, baby. But you know what I think? Well, I think you're pretty brave, too. You moved into a strange house in the middle of nowhere, and you didn't complain, not once. You helped me clean, and you took care of your brother, and you believed me when I told you we would be okay, even when I wasn't sure myself. That takes courage. I'm 7, Lily said, as if this explained everything. 7-year-olds can be very brave. Lily smiled. Good night, Mama. Good night, Aunt Lily. Clara turned off the bedside lamp and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her daughter settle into sleep. The room was warm. The house was quiet. Outside, the Virginia stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and the fountain in the garden murmured softly in the darkness, the mouth that drinks but never speaks, finally having said everything it needed to say. Clara walked through the house, her house, turning off lights as she went. She passed through the entrance hall, where the stained glass window stood dark and waiting for the morning sun. She passed through the front parlor, where the Italian marble fireplace glowed with the last embers of the evening's fire. She passed through the library, where a leather journal sat in a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf, the journal of a man named Cornelius Hargrove, who had kept a secret for 45 years, and had, in doing so, changed the life of a woman he would never meet. She stopped at the front door and opened it. The night air was cool and smelled like spring. The porch, rebuilt and strong, did not creak under her feet. The columns stood straight. The grounds stretched out before her, 4 acres of land that she owned, that she had earned, that no one could take from her. Clara Whitfield, who had once been a broke single mother, with $812 to her name and an eviction notice on her kitchen table. I stood on the porch of her 22-room mansion and looked out at the world that had told her she would fail. And she smiled. Because she hadn't failed, she had not given up. She had not listened to the doubters, or the mockers, or the people who told her she was crazy. She had trusted herself when no one else would. She had worked when others would have quit. She had believed when there was nothing to believe in, except a dead man's journal and a brass key, and a feeling in her chest that said, this house was not a mistake. $750. That is what she had paid. $750 for a house that no one wanted, that everyone laughed at, that the whole town said should be torn down and forgotten. $327 million. That is what she had found. Hidden in the walls, buried in the earth, locked behind a steel door that had been waiting for over 70 years for someone brave enough to open it. But the real treasure, the one that no appraiser could value and no tax attorney could calculate, was not in the vault. It was in the bedroom upstairs, where a 4-year-old boy slept in a castle bed with clear lungs and a full stomach, and a 7-year-old girl dreamed in red sneakers about a future that was finally, impossibly, wide open. Clara stood on the porch for a long time, breathing the night air, listening to the fountain, feeling the solid wood beneath her feet. Then she went inside, closed the door behind her, and climbed the stairs to the room she had restored with her own hands, in the house she had saved, in the life she had built from nothing. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Clara Whitfield slept without dreaming. Because when your waking life finally becomes better than anything you could dream, your mind can rest. It can finally, truly rest. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.